Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for allowing me this time. I know we're all very busy. I'm Stephanie Higgs. I work for Easterseals Veterans Count. I've been there about 13 years. Most recently, I was doing clinical mental health counseling for military members, both veterans and those who are currently serving, and doing a lot of couples work, actually. So I've taken a detour for the time being and working on this grant-funded initiative through the Department of Military Affairs and Veteran Services to talk with care providers like you about the importance of asking about military service when we work with people in the community and who come in for our services and benefits. And why that's important. So if there are any people on this call who have been around for about 10 years in the social services arena, you may remember Ask the Question. It was initially launched 10 years ago, a huge statewide campaign. We had billboards, we had ServiceLink staff in every county working in collaboration with us to do boots on the ground messaging to providers in their local counties. So it's a big deal, and it's being revitalized on this 10-year anniversary because, hey, people change, people forget, why they're asking, things slip off intake forms. So we're having a remessaging and reinvigoration of this initiative. So before we get started, oh, lovely. I can't. That's why we didn't check, Emily.
I just realized we didn't
My
practice that.
slides won't
If you check or
advance.
if you hit your space bar or return, there you go.
There we go. Just use my mouse.
If
So
you,
you can all see that screen changed?
yes. Now we're on the
Yes.
quick quiz. Yeah.
Okay, good. So because I can't see all of you, if you would just write down what you think the answers are, and then I'll give them to you. But I'd like to first ask you a couple questions. What percentage of our U.S. citizens do you think serve in the military? Just put down a quick percentage. And then what do we call the different groups of the military is my second question. How many groups are there and what are they? This is a tricky one. I'll give you a couple minutes to think about that one. Not a couple minutes, but. And then lastly, have you or a family member ever served in the military? So I'd really like to hear the answer to the last question, but the percentage of US citizens that serve in the military is a little under 1%. So I'm sure a lot of you thought, oh, maybe 20, oh, maybe 10, but it's actually only a little under 1%, believe it or not. What do you call the different groups of the military? Is there any way to unmute like everybody so people can, or is that?
Yeah, they can, or people can just, a couple people put things in the chat. Somebody wrote branches
Yeah,
as
branches,
their
yay.
answer. Yeah.
Yeah, branches. And so how many branches of the military are there and what are they? Can anybody shout out those?
Somebody put 5 as their answer. Nobody wrote what the names are, but if somebody wants to unmute and give names, feel free to do so.
So 5 is close, and 5 is what we're used to because it's been 5 for a very, very long time. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. But now we have Space Force. So you'll now see in places where the flags of all the branches are displayed, you'll see a black flag with white lettering. That's the Space Force flag, and it's now our 6th branch of the military. And the last question is, have you or a family member ever served in the military? My highlighted comment underneath that is that about 1 in 4 people have some connection to the military. For me, my son's serving right now in the Marine Corps. He's been in for about 14 years. And but lots of people have brothers, sisters, parents, nieces, nephews, grandparents. Really interesting how many people have a connection to the military. It's very rare that people don't have any connection, even neighbors, friends. So, oops, forget that I have to advance this like this. So today I just want to spend a little bit of time talking with you about why we would ask you to ask about military service when people come in for services. Why is that important? What difference does it make? And also talk just very briefly about stigma. You are all, I'm sure, in your current roles, familiar with stigma with the people that you're working with now. I mean, people who are aging, people who have disabilities. There's stigma for all kinds of reasons. The military isn't the only place where there's stigma, but there is stigma related to military service that's important to understand when we're working with people who have served. Also, just to give you an idea of how to maybe build rapport more effectively, some things, some do's and don'ts essentially. And then to learn about where can I go to get some more information on health assessments. I'm not sure if you do a lot of this, but if you do, where to get a PTSD assessment, where to get an assessment for TBIs. Okay. So what's the who, what, where, when, and how of Ask the Question? Let's start at the beginning. So what is Ask the Question? As I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's a statewide initiative to educate and empower service providers in all different service sectors. We call them service domains for the purposes of this initiative, but whether you're a firefighter or a second grade teacher, or you work at ServiceLink, or you work in the hospital ER, whatever your situation where may be in terms of your employment, and if you're encountering people who are coming in for services and for help, it's important to understand that military service has an impact on people's presenting needs. So it's really just to raise the awareness of the importance of asking the question. And why is it needed? What happened was about 15 years ago, there was a commission on PTSD and TBI in New Hampshire, and they did a statewide survey of veterans. And at that time, they were asking, hey, what are the services you use in your community? And if you're not using those services, why aren't you using those services? And the answer to that last question was what compelled the whole Ask the Question initiative, because veterans essentially said, I don't seek treatment the way I should seek treatment. It's because I'm afraid that my providers won't understand me. They won't understand military culture. They won't understand how it impacts what my life is like and what my needs are. So I'm not going to bother. So those results were profound and heard. And the original Ask the Question initiative was formulated from that feedback. And that response remains true today. So that's why we do the best that we can to educate people like you about the importance of asking, but also we talk about military culture. And that's something we can talk about at the end because we do offer that training. You're gonna have to forgive me for being messed up. So here's a little bit more about stigma. As I mentioned, stigma isn't unique to military and veterans, but there are specific ones that are related to service, and I'm going to go over those in a minute. Some of these aren't necessarily bad, and of course, stigma isn't always, have a bad intention around it, but we just form these stereotypes over time. When we find out something, we go, oh, so all are blah, blah, blah. But over glorification, some people who served in the military didn't have the best experience. They may not be your John Wayne type veteran. When I started working for Easterseals Veterans Count, I came in thinking all veterans were John Wayne. They were all honorable, and they all, did everything the right way, and all of that. That was my view of military. And that's not always true. We have people who have served in the military who do some bad things, in their civilian life, and they struggle with a lot of the different issues that we struggle with. So it's not always an attempt to be down. It's also assumptions form around positive things too. So here's where some of our assumptions can lead to stigma. If you served in the military, that means that you served during war. Nope. My cohort, I graduated in the early 80s from high school, and my classmates served in the early 80s. There wasn't any war per se at that time, so just because we served in the military, there wasn't war. Just because there was war, I served during a war period, doesn't mean I deployed. I may have stayed stateside and supported the troops from the stateside. And just because I deployed may not mean that I saw combat. There's a lot of support services, on the bases in foreign countries. So just because we deploy doesn't mean we see combat. There's all kinds of jobs and roles that people are playing, and most of them aren't combat roles. Just because I saw combat doesn't mean I have PTSD. A lot of people see combat, they see horrific things, and their mental health is not impacted to the point of developing PTSD. And just because we have PTSD, if we are diagnosed with PTSD, doesn't mean that's related to war. Military sexual trauma is a perfect example of that, unfortunately. And then just because we have PTSD doesn't mean we're unstable. There are a lot of people who are being treated for PTSD, who are perfectly stable, contributing members of society. So those are assumptions, though, that can lead to stigma if they're not checked. I swear by the end I'll get it right. So what is in it for me? Here I am, a healthcare worker. I'm now providing direct support to people in the community. Why do I care about this? What's in it for me? One of the things, we all hate it when people don't show up for appointments, right? Or they're not there when they're supposed to be. So first of all, if veterans believe that you care about their military experience and that you have some sense of what that's all about, and again, military culture training is a great way to address this, but veterans are more likely to seek care in the first place. I'm going to go out and get care. I'm not going to be afraid to talk with civilian providers. I know they'll have some semblance of understanding about what my needs are. They show up to appointments more often. Again, lower no-show rates if people feel like they're culturally understood. They're more likely to disclose information that you might not have otherwise known. And then they're more likely to follow through with treatment plans. So how do we want you to ask the question? So the question that we want asked is, have you or a family member ever served in the military? Many of you may work for organizations or in your past work may have had intake forms that ask, are you a veteran? And I applaud that. And I don't want to discourage anyone from asking about veteran status because, hey, it's better than nothing and you're on the right path. But in fact, this question has specific wording for very specific reasons. And the reason why we don't say, are you a veteran, is because a lot of veterans, believe it or not, don't identify as veterans for some of the reasons that I just mentioned in the stigma. But oftentimes, hey, if I didn't see combat, I'm not going to call myself a veteran. Or if I'm not eligible for the VA for whatever reason, I'm not going to call myself a veteran. So there's lots of different reasons. Maybe their discharge status wasn't honorable. Maybe it was other than honorable, or maybe, at its worst, it was dishonorable discharge. And so sometimes factors like that play into whether veterans consider themselves veterans. So we encourage you to say, have you or a family member ever served in the military? Because we find that we get more positive responses to that question than we do if we say, are you a veteran? And the other piece of it is, have you or a family member? So we also want to identify people who are living in the home with the veteran, who might be caring for the veteran, who might be more reliable reporters than the veteran him or herself. And we also know that those people who are living with veterans and taking care of veterans may have their own needs, and they might be eligible for some benefits and services as well. So we want to include them in it. When do we want you to do this? As I've kind of mentioned throughout, ideally it would be upon intake or enrollment or admission in a hospital or registration for a program. So kind of at the beginning of your engagement with this person, we'd love for it to happen then. But hey, what's so bad about on their 6th dentist appointment or, their 10th time coming in for fuel assistance? Let's ask then, just because we haven't asked before. Let's ask now. It's never too late to ask. We just want to open up the conversation, get people connected to resources as soon as possible. And as I kind of gave some examples earlier, everywhere. Elementary school registrations, women's services, DV centers, mental health clinics, attorneys' offices, housing programs, everywhere. So who? You'll be surprised to know that we have about 92,000 veterans and currently serving in the state of New Hampshire. Was anyone surprised by that? I was. That's a lot of people. New Hampshire is very, very, very military heavy, even though we don't have an active duty base, which is really curious. I don't know if it's the live free or die. I don't know if it's the northern parts of the state that people just, are drawn to. But we have a very large number of veterans and service members in our state. The 10th largest per capita population in the country, and New Hampshire's this big. So it's really astounding. So as you wouldn't be surprised, 91% are men, 9% are women. Vietnam veterans are our largest population of veterans at this moment. Our World War II veterans, every day, we lose some more World War II veterans. Korean War veterans are kind of our oldest veterans right now for the most part, except for those World War II veterans. So New Hampshire is an aging veteran population for sure. So when we think about veterans issues and aging issues and those coming together, there's a lot of unique ways that veterans can need help. So about half of that population is enrolled in the VA. I always thought before I worked for Easterseals that everybody who served in the military would get their health care at the VA. Isn't that what the VA is for? It's a big hospital. They take care of all the veterans. That's not true. And there's a lot of variables at play there, both in terms of length of service, whether you saw combat, whether you completed a deployment, what your discharge status was, all kinds of reasons why you may or may not be eligible for VA healthcare. But we know that even though about half are enrolled at the VA now, there's a large number of people who are not enrolled that could be enrolled. So that's one of the first things we really want to try to identify is, could this person who's here for services for me possibly be eligible for VA services and benefits as well? Because if they are, it often opens up a plethora of services and benefits that they didn't even know existed. Most of New Hampshire's veterans are doing very well. You can see the statistics at the bottom. 80% own their own homes. 34% have a bachelor's degree or higher, decent household incomes. But we have room for improvement. So there are some areas in which, unemployment rates are slightly higher if you're a veteran. Issues with housing, slightly higher if you're a veteran. There's some statistics on there that talk about that as well, but suicide rates. So I don't know if that's in your way. Some of the possible impacts, I've talked about some of these already, but this just gives you an idea for different service domains, whether it be housing, whether it be legal services, medical services. There's lots of different ways that asking about military service can have a positive impact on our veterans. And here's one. So this is Muriel. You probably work with a lot of people like Muriel. If you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly read this so that we can get to the why it's important. But Muriel was panicking. She had been a widow for the past 10 years and had recently depleted her savings from her late husband's retirement account. She's having trouble making her ends meet. Her own health was dwindling. She felt that she could use some help, so she reached out to a senior center, and the social worker there, got her connected to some very common resources. But it still wasn't enough. She was still struggling. And what the social worker didn't know, because she didn't ask about her husband's service, was that because Muriel's husband had served in the Korean War, there's a very unique niche benefit available for Korean War widows through the VA. So had that question been asked, Muriel could have been connected to the VA and could have been receiving those Korean War widow benefits. So it's just a quick example of how that question could impact the whole flow of services that you're able to provide. These are some subsequent questions that you could ask. If they say yes, well then, what branch did they serve in? What era did they serve in? Did they have any service-connected disabilities? The third question about medications, We asked people about their medications and things like that. I had a veteran I was working with a few years ago who was struggling. They had I think it was like $700 a month in, which probably isn't surprising to a lot of you who work in home health care, but $700 a month in medication costs. Wasn't enrolled at the VA. One of the first things I did was see if he might be eligible for the VA, and we determined that he was. When he went to the VA, he could get all his medications for $5 a month. So it was like a profound life-changing impact on him to be enrolled at the VA and get his medications filled through the VA. So not everyone's eligible for the VA. Not everyone's going to get their medications there, but just asking that question can open up so many different opportunities. There's another example of little Billy. I won't go through Billy, but essentially his dad ended up being deployed, and he was going around the schoolyard shooting his little classmates with his imaginary gun, and he got in some trouble. And essentially they had asked him in art class to draw a picture of people that he loved, and he had drawn a picture of a person with a gun. And so he got in some more trouble at school. They didn't know that he had a father that was deployed. They didn't ask on the enrollment forms about whether there's anyone in the family who was in the military. So they didn't know his dad was deployed. And their response to him, had they known, I'm sure would have been a lot different. I've got a 2.5-year-old grandson right now, and my son's going to be deployed. So this example hits home for me. Just going to skip that. So some of you may be thinking, I don't want to ask the question, because if they say yes, I don't know what I'm going to do. Here she is talking about these VA medication benefits and all this Korean War thing. And oh my God, how am I going to know? So there's tons of tools out there for you, in addition to the military culture training that I provide and that others provide. But there's toolkits. I'm going to provide you with materials afterwards that give you these links. But essentially there's links to those assessments that I talked about earlier, PTSD, TBI, MST. There's a community provider toolkit that gives you those subsequent questions to ask and what to do about the answers. There's resource lists. So don't ever hesitate to ask the question because you're nervous about not being able to help afterwards. There's tons of resources. Okay, so if someone says yes and you're worried about how am I going to build rapport, same way you build rapport with everybody. Just know that with military service, there often happens to be an additional layer on their life experience that can complicate things. But all the things that you're doing now to build trust and rapport will be the same things that you use with people who have served in the military. It's very important to meet your obligations. And if you say you're going to do something, to actually do it. You will lose instant credibility with military if you don't fulfill your promises, for sure. But just know, don't be intimidated. They're human beings just like you and I. We don't want, one of the don'ts is, especially in our highly politicized society, it's very hard to sometimes squelch our political opinions, but that would be a big no. If I were to give you a red light, to not talk about your opinions about war or the military or Trump's deployment of the National Guard in California, things like that, because you never know what's going to lead. You never know where they are and all of that, and it's often not a place to build rapport. Know that asking for help is a sign of weakness in terms of military culture. So it's taken a lot for someone to get where they are in front of you. People who seem kind of flat affect and emotionless doesn't mean they're not carrying a lot. It just means that's what they've been trained to do, to not show and express a lot of emotion. Again, these are generalities that I'm providing you, but these are often things that keep people from developing that rapport. If you want to be military friendly in your office, I'm not sure if you have offices that can have flags outside. It's always a good sign, some red, white, and blue in your office. And just remember they're community members like you are, especially in New Hampshire. Again, we don't have an active duty military base. We've got a large population of those who serve in the National Guard and the reserves. So they're weekend warriors. They go for annual training. They go for training once a month. You may not even know that your neighbor works in the National Guard or the reserves. So I'm going to provide you again with these links about Ask the Question. And know that there's military culture and other training out there. Harbor Care does a great job. The VA has a safe suicide prevention program. Harbor Care does a suicide prevention program called QPR. There's a lot of online resources. I'm going to provide you with this link. And I'm happy to do a military culture training, get more into the stuff that we just kind of surface touched on today. Here's again some resource links I'm going to send you, but for GVFR, New Hampshire doesn't have a services problem and a resource problem. They have an education problem. There are a ton of resources for veterans in the state of New Hampshire, including Easterseals Veterans Count. And by the way, quick plug for Easterseals. If you are working with a veteran or someone in a veteran's family and you find out that they have an emergency need for financial assistance, please let us know, because we have philanthropy arms to our program that do a lot of big fundraising out in the community. So we don't want someone to have their car repoed or their lights shut off or get evicted from their housing when we can provide emergency financial assistance. So we're obligated to spend that money. We want to spend that money. Our donors want us to spend that money. So we don't want to find out something happened after the fact and we might have been able to help. If you're interested in being a veteran-friendly business, I'll send you the link to do that as well. That's through the Department of Military Affairs and Veteran Services. And I know I blew through all that stuff. This is my last slide. If you could please just take a quick picture of that QR code to provide, I think there's 5 questions. It just asks you 2 assessment questions and then 3 questions about who you are and where you're from. So if you could fill that out real quickly, I would greatly appreciate it. I'll also send it to you in an email or through Emily through an email. But if you could do that, that's my last slide. So if we do have questions,